Wyoming Territory, 1887. The wind carried dust over the dry plains east of Rawlins as the train screamed off in the distance, leaving behind only two figures and a broken wagon wheel. Tallie Gracewood stood beside the busted wagon with her jaw clenched and her hands scraped. Her dress, once a neat blue cotton, was now worn with travel and too many restless nights. She had 2 sacks of flour, a small crate of canned peaches, and her brother's rifle. No husband, no father, no family left except for 2 small faces watching her from the back of the wagon. Zeke and Zadie, age 6 and 4, blinked against the dirt in the air. They had not spoken much since their mama died 2 weeks ago outside Laramie. Tallie had buried her sister with her own hands. The children had clung to her like burrs since. "You two stay put," Tallie said, crouching to check the splintered wheel again. There was no fixing it. She had no horse left, either, not after it dropped dead from heat 2 miles back. She stood, wiping her palms against her skirt, and stared down the empty trail. No towns for miles, no trees. Just sun and silence. Then she saw him riding slow down the trail on a chestnut gelding, dust kicking up behind him. The cowboy wore a dark hat pulled low, a long duster brushing his boots, and a rifle slung across his back. He looked like heat and trouble, but he slowed when he saw the wagon. He reined in beside them and tipped his hat. "You all right, miss?" Tallie kept her body in front of the children. "Who are you?" "Name's Vaughn Ridley," he said with a calm voice. "Saw your wagon from the ridge yonder, wheels gone. I can see that." She was too tired for pleasantries. "We do not need help." The children peeked out. Zadie coughed. Vaughn's eyes flicked to them, then back to Tallie. "You sure we manage?" He dismounted anyway, walking toward the wheel with the easy gait of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than anywhere else. Tallie stepped forward. "I said we do not need. You're 2 days from anywhere. That horse is gone. You have 2 children with you." Vaughn crouched beside the wheel. "You need help." Tallie's throat tightened. She hated how true it was. He stood again and met her eyes. "Let me fix what I can. I will get you to town." "I do not have money for that. I did not ask for money." She hesitated, heart pounding. "Why?" Vaughn glanced at the children again. "Because I would want someone to stop if it were me and mine out here." After a long pause, Tallie nodded. He set to work without another word, pulling rope and tools from his saddlebag. The sun dropped slow as he patched the wheel enough to drag it behind his horse. He lifted Zadie like she weighed air and helped Zeke climb up beside her. Tallie walked beside them, rifle slung across her shoulder, never more than a few steps from the wagon. That night they made camp near a dry creek. Vaughn built the fire. Tallie cooked canned beans. The children ate and curled up together under a blanket. Once they were asleep, Vaughn sat across from her, firelight flickering between them. "You there, Aunt?" he asked. "I am now," she said. "What happened?" She looked at the flames. "My sister died of fever. Their father left 2 years ago, never came back." He nodded once, quiet. "And you?" she asked, watching his face. "You always ride around rescuing strangers." "No," he said. "But I know what it is to lose family, and I know what it is to be left behind." She studied him. His voice was steady, but it came from somewhere hollow and old. "I've been trying to get to Cheyenne," she finally said. "Thought maybe I could cook or clean for someone, maybe find a place for the children." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You do not have anyone there?" "No, you married." She shook her head. "I am not meant to marry." That made his brow lift. "Why do you say that?" "Because I am not gentle. I do not sew. I do not play piano. I can shoot. I can skin a rabbit, and I can bury a body. That is what life taught me." Vaughn was quiet a long time. Then he said, "Then you are meant to marry me." Tallie felt the words hit like wind in a quiet house. She stared at him. "You do not know me." "I know enough," he said, meeting her eyes. "You are strong. You are honest. You protect those children like they are your own." "That is more than most." She looked away. "You are being kind." "No," he said, voice low. "I am being real." The fire popped. Zadie stirred in her sleep. Tallie stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. Her heart was a storm. "We should sleep," she said. Vaughn nodded, laying out his bedroll a few feet away near the fire. He did not press, he did not touch her, but when she lay down, she felt warmer than she had in weeks. The next morning, they rode slowly. Vaughn kept the children laughing with stories about prairie dogs and how he once got kicked by a mule for stealing its apple. Tallie watched him with cautious eyes. He did not act like a man trying to prove something. He just did what needed doing. He never asked for thanks. That night she handed him a bowl of beans without a word and sat beside him. Vaughn looked at her, then at the children playing near the firelight. "I never thought I would settle," he said, "but I reckon I would for the right reason." Tallie glanced at him. "You think I am the right reason?" He smiled, small. "I think you are the best one I have ever seen." She did not answer, but she stayed by him until the fire burned low, and when the wind picked up, she leaned closer without saying why. They reached Cheyenne 3 days later. Vaughn found them a small cabin on the edge of town, near a stream and a patch of wild sunflowers. He helped repair the roof. He brought flour and sugar. He brought a rocking chair for Zadie, who had never had one before. Tallie watched him build shelves, fix the stove, and carry Zeke on his shoulders like he had done it forever. And one afternoon, while the children napped and the sun poured through the window, she stepped outside where he was chopping wood. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. Tallie walked up to him, heart pounding. "I have not changed my mind," she said. "I am still not meant to marry." Vaughn dropped the axe and faced her. "And I still say you are meant to marry me." She stared at him, breath caught. "Because I do not want someone who plays piano," he said. "I want someone who fights and stands and stays. I want you. I do not know how to be anyone's wife." "Good," he said. "Because I do not want a wife, I want a partner." Tallie blinked fast. Her hands trembled. Vaughn stepped closer. "Do you want me?" She nodded, once, fierce. He cupped her face and kissed her, slow and steady, her arms wrapped around his neck. The world dropped away, the door creaked open behind them. Zeke's voice called, "Tallie." She pulled back, breathless. "Out here." Vaughn smiled, brushing her cheek. "We will tell them together." She nodded again, chest full. This time, when she looked at him, there was no fear, only something deep and solid taking root, something that felt like home. The porch creaked under Tallie's boots as she stepped out into the quiet morning. A thin veil of frost clung to the grass beyond the fence, and chimney smoke curled up from the stovepipe Vaughn had resealed with a piece of tin. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and glanced toward the barn. Vaughn was already moving inside, lifting a sack of oats onto the feed shelf. He didn't look up until she reached the doorway. "You're up early," he said, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I heard the rooster," she replied. "Figured I might as well start the bread." Vaughn nodded, then shifted his weight. "I got a lead on work. Blacksmith 3 parcels over needs help repairing a wagon lift." She leaned against the frame. "What do you know about wagon lifts?" "About as much as I knew about building a chicken coop," he said. "But I figure if I watch careful and ask smart, I'll come out knowing more than I did." Tallie looked past him, toward the back of the barn where Zeke had planted 2 bean shoots in a cracked tin pail. "Zeke's been asking about school." "There's a teacher holds lessons in that church down near the river," Vaughn said. "I rode past it last week. Children were spilling out with slates and ink on their fingers." "He's never sat still long," she said softly. "But he's sharp." Vaughn picked up a length of rope, coiling it slow. "I could walk him there, let him see it first, no pressure." She folded her arms. "Would you?" "Of course I would." A long pause settled between them. The barn smelled of straw and old leather. Tallie watched him work the knot at the end of the rope. "You don't ask for much." Vaughn's hands stilled. "I didn't come here to take." "I know, still," her voice lowered. "It unsettles me sometimes." He stepped closer, the rope now looped neatly in his hand. "You ever think maybe you're just not used to being cared for without conditions?" She didn't answer. He laid the rope down on the shelf. "I don't want you owing me anything, Tallie. Not for helping, not for staying." She looked up at him, wind lifting strands of hair across her cheek. "But I do owe you, not with debt, with trust." Vaughn's voice gentled. "Then let me earn it quiet and steady, not all at once." She nodded once. "All right." Later that day, Tallie sat at the kitchen table with Zadie nestled in her lap, brushing tangles from the child's hair with a bone comb. The girl hummed under her breath, watching the fire in the stove. Zeke sat on the floor, bent over a wooden puzzle Vaughn had carved for him with a pocket knife. Tallie had found it in the bottom drawer that morning, wrapped in burlap and smelling faintly of cedar. The cabin had changed. Not in appearance, there were still cracks in the floorboards and a draft under the back door, but in weight. It no longer felt like a place they were passing through. It felt like a place being built around them. That evening, after the children were asleep, Tallie stepped outside. Vaughn sat on the porch rail, rolling a cigarette with slow fingers, though he didn't light it. She sat down beside him. He handed her the little carved horse he'd whittled earlier that week. "It's for Zadie. I thought she might like something to hold while she's falling asleep." Tallie turned the figure in her hand. "She holds my sleeve most nights." Vaughn shifted, glancing toward the window. "She'll stop in time, she might not. And if she doesn't, that's all right too." Tallie held the horse between her palms, warming the smooth wood. "You're not what I expected." He gave a small breath of laughter. "What did you expect? A man who'd want something in return? Or someone who'd disappear once the hard part was over?" "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Unless you ask me to." She didn't speak at first. "Then I won't." They sat in silence, listening to the wind move through the dry grass. "I've been thinking," she said at last. "There's a piece of land east of here. It's got a stream and a stand of cottonwoods that would give good shade. If we could manage it, I'd like to grow something real, not just survive." Vaughn looked over at her. "What would you grow?" "Tomatoes, maybe corn." "Something the children can help with," he nodded. "Then we'll get that land." She tilted her head. I meant what I said," he replied. "I'm not looking for a place to pass through either." Tallie leaned her shoulder against his. He didn't move, just let her rest there. "I still don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "We'll figure it out as we go." She closed her eyes briefly. The wind cooled and the stars came out quiet and wide above. Vaughn's hand found hers, fingers calloused and warm. She didn't pull away. The creek behind the cabin swelled with meltwater as spring peeled back the last of winter's hush. Vaughn had repaired the fence line south of the clearing, and now he stood ankle-deep in mud, sleeves rolled, guiding a spade through the thawed earth. Tallie watched from the porch, arms crossed, the weight of a decision resting behind her eyes. "I was thinking," she called out, "if we dig wide rows, we could put beans along the east side. They'll catch more light that way." Vaughn straightened, leaning on the spade. "We could. And cabbage by the north fence, it'll hold up better in shade." She walked down the slope, apron hem brushing damp grass. "Do you know anything about cabbage? I know it's stubborn, like you." She let out a short breath. "That's not a compliment, ain't meant to be." "It's just true." She crouched beside him, scooping a handful of soil in her palm. It crumbled loose, black and rich. "This ground's better than I thought," he nodded, not looking at her. "It'll grow something if we tend it right." They worked without talk for a while, trading the spade between them, hands dirt-laced and shirts damp at the collar. When Zeke came trotting down with a cracked tin cup and a proud grin, Tallie took it, drank deep, and handed it to Vaughn. "He said he filled it from the barrel himself," she murmured, wiping her mouth. Vaughn tipped the cup back, eyes on the boy. "He's proud of the work." Tallie followed his gaze. "He's steadying out some, more than I expected." Vaughn leaned down, brushing loose dirt from his knee. "That's what happens when a place starts feeling safe." She didn't answer, but her fingers found the edge of his shirt briefly before she stood. That evening, with the children inside tracing letters by lamplight, Tallie sat on the porch with a piece of mending in her lap. The thread tugged clean through the cotton, steady and precise. Vaughn came up from the barn, hands washed, damp hair curling where it met his neck. "You ever think about adding onto the cabin?" he asked, settling on the top step. She didn't look up. "I have. But only in pieces, in my head." He leaned back on his elbows. "I saw a man in town last week, said he tore down a schoolhouse in Elk Mountain, got lumber stacked and drying." She let the needle rest. "You thinking of buying it?" "I was thinking we could use it, a loft for the children. Maybe a room off the back somewhere quiet, give you space." She turned the cloth over. "I don't need space from you." He looked over, eyes steady. "You sure?" "I wouldn't be here if I weren't." He reached for her hand then, not rushed, not bold, just certain. She let the cloth fall and wove her fingers through his. His palm was rougher than hers, but it fit. "I want to marry you, Tallie," he said, voice low. Not because I ought to, not because I'm fixing something, because I love you. She didn't flinch. I've never said that word out loud. You don't have to, he said, but I want to, she added, turning toward him. I've been carrying it quiet, maybe long as you. He waited, not pressing. She tucked her legs beneath her and said it not soft, not trembling, but even and plain as sun through trees. I love you. Vaughn didn't speak. He just pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, breath shared in the hush before nightfall. Inside, Zadie's voice rose in song, high and small, and Zeke's pencil scratched faintly across the page. Tallie closed her eyes, hand still in Vaughn's, and felt the last of something old fall away. Tomorrow they'd ride into town, speak their vows under the roof of a man who once mended saddles and now married folks with the same quiet reverence. There would be no fine dresses, no rings, just a promise spoken with both feet planted in the dirt they now called home. And after, they'd return to the cabin, where the lamp would glow behind the window and cabbage seeds waited in a bowl on the sill. They would sleep, not as two halves patched together, but as one life, whole and steady, shaped by days that asked everything and gave back only what was earned. And that, Tallie thought, was enough, more than enough. Rain fell low and steady the morning they married. It tapped soft against the roof as if not to disturb the quiet inside. Tallie laid her hand flat on the edge of the washbasin, watching water darken the wood beneath her palm. Her hair was damp from the stove-warmed cloth she'd pressed to it, the ends curling awkward around her ears. She had no white dress, only a clean slate gray one with mended seams and a row of bone buttons Vaughn had sewn back on himself. Zadie sat on the floor brushing a crooked doll's hair with a chicken feather. Zeke stood at the hearth, tugging at the collar of the shirt Tallie had stitched smaller to fit him. Do I have tea wear this all day? He asked, frowning. It's just for the morning, she said. After you can change into your usual shirt. He crossed his arms. I liked the old one better, then you'll like it even more come supper. He gave a begrudging shrug and wandered toward his sister. Tallie looked once more in the warped mirror hanging beside the door, then stepped outside. Vaughn waited just beyond the porch, hat in hand, wearing his Sunday shirt with the sleeves rolled back to his forearms. The wagon stood ready, bridled with the mare they'd traded for last week, a broad-shouldered roan with a steady gait and a temper that didn't mind children crawling underfoot. You sure? He asked, his voice low. She met his eyes. I'm walking there beside you, aren't I? He smiled, not with his mouth but with a slow warmth that deepened in his gaze. The children climbed up into the wagon bed, legs swinging. Vaughn took the reins and Tallie sat beside him, the scent of wet sage lingering on the air. The road into town was rutted from last week's wagons, but the mare handled it like she'd known the route 100 times. They passed a stand of red osier dogwood, slick with rain. A hawk circled above the ridge, barely visible through the mist. You want to say words? Vaughn asked after a long stretch of silence. I mean vows, or just let the man speak his piece and call it done. I've thought about that, she said. But the only thing I want to say out loud is that I choose you. The rest, I already show. He nodded once. That's enough for me. The church was no grand thing, just a low building of weather-worn pine with a bell that didn't ring more than twice a week. The man who opened the door had a long white beard and a gait that suggested he'd been a blacksmith before he took up officiating. He waved them in without fuss. The children sat on the front bench, quiet and wide-eyed. The room smelled faintly of kerosene and old hymnals. Tallie stood across from Vaughn, her hands still speckled with flour from the biscuits she'd shaped before dawn. He took them in his without hesitation. The man's voice was gravel-edged and low. No sermon, no dramatics. Just the binding of two people beneath a roof neither of them had built, but both would remember. After, Zadie tugged at Tallie's skirt and whispered, "Can I call him Papa now?" Tallie crouched, tucking hair behind Zadie's ear. "If you want to." Zadie nodded, small and sure. They rode home slow. The rain had stopped, and the sky broke open in slivers of light that caught the wet grass and made it shine like new coin. That evening, Tallie sat by the stove, shirt sleeves rolled to her elbows, shelling peas into a tin bowl. Vaughn leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a look that said he hadn't yet found the words for the thing settled between them. "You ever think about the trail you didn't take?" she asked, not looking up. "Often," he said, "but not today." She glanced at him. "I was meant to end up here," he said. "Even if the road wandered longer than it should have." She offered him a half smile. "I believe that." He stepped toward her, knelt beside the stool, and took a handful of peas to help. The fire cracked behind them. Zeke was outside with the new pup Vaughn had found near the creek bed, and Zadie was curled in the rocking chair with her doll. "You know," Tallie said after a while, "I never thought I'd feel known, not without giving too much of myself away." Vaughn hushed the peas into the bowl. "You didn't give anything away you didn't choose." She looked at him, full and steady. "That's the difference, isn't it?" He nodded. Later, when the children were tucked under quilts and the lamp was turned low, Tallie stood at the window, watching clouds drift past the moon. Vaughn came up behind her, resting his hands at her waist. "You're not one for saying much," she said. "You don't need me to," he replied. She turned in his arms, resting her forehead against his chest. "I think I might have been waiting for you without knowing it." "You were never waiting," he said. "You were surviving, now you're living." She closed her eyes, holding to that truth like a root to soil. And in the hush of their small home, with the wind settling and the earth softening for spring, they stood together without fear, without question. Their lives, once scattered like ash, had found their hearth. The first wheat sprouts came up in late April, faint green threads trembling in the wind behind the cabin. Vaughn had built a scarecrow with Zeke's help, using a torn flannel shirt and a hat Tallie had patched from the bottom drawer. They named it Caleb, after a man Vaughn once knew who never stopped talking, and they stuck it in the middle of the field like a sentry. Tallie stood barefoot in the doorway that morning, her toes sunk into the cool earth. The days had lengthened, and the sound of frogs croaking from the creek carried into the evenings. She held a cloth sack against her hip, filled with corn seed she'd traded for at the mercantile. "I was thinking the west row might be best," she said, tilting her head toward the open patch beyond the potatoes. Vaughn leaned against the fence post, arms crossed, watching her. "That'll catch the runoff from the hill after rain. Good choice." She gave a small nod, turning toward the soil. "You know, I never thought I'd care about runoff. You care about everything now," he said. "That's what building a life does." She knelt and pushed her fingers into the dirt, spacing the kernels by feel. "I used to think building a life meant waiting for the world to give you something. It doesn't," he said. "You carve it out or go without." Zadie's voice drifted from the cabin window as she recited a counting rhyme, her doll propped beside her with a dried flower tucked behind its ear. Tallie glanced over her shoulder, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "She's been humming in her sleep lately," she said. "I think she's starting to dream again." Vaughn came toward her, crouched beside the row. "What about you?" She pressed another seed into the earth. "I dream quieter than I used to, but yes." He watched her hands move, sure and steady. "What do you see?" She paused, looking out over the field. "Zeke running through the wheat with his boots tied with twine. Zadie swinging from the tree we'll plant one day near the porch. You coming in from the barn with your sleeves rolled and your mouth already full from stealing biscuits." He laughed low in his throat. "You see all that? Clear as anything." He rested his hand over hers and she let it stay. Later that week, they rode to the river together with a wagon load of firewood to trade. Zeke stayed behind with the widow Bellamy, who lived 2 parcels east and had raised 5 boys before her husband passed. Zadie went along, curled beside Tallie on the bench with a basket of eggs in her lap. The trail wound through willows and over a shallow ford where the wheels dipped low and water soaked the spokes. Vaughn drove without speaking, his eyes on the road ahead. "I saw you looking at that land past the ridge," Tallie said after a while. "I was wondering if it runs all the way to the Elk Trail," he replied. "If it does, we could fence it in come autumn." "You think we need more?" He looked at her then. "I think we'll want it, eventually." She turned that over in her mind, running a finger along the basket's rim. "Then we'll save for it, little by little." He reached over, brushing a straw from her sleeve. You've got a way of making hard things sound like steps instead of walls, she gave a quiet laugh. That's because I've climbed enough of both to know the difference. They reached the trading post just after midday. Vaughn loaded the wood while Tallie bartered for salt and a bolt of muslin. Zadie clung to her skirt, watching everything with wide eyes. The storekeeper, a stooped man with a cane carved from driftwood, gave the girl a peppermint without a word, just a nod. On the way home, the wind picked up and clouds rolled in slate gray and low. They reached the cabin just as the first drops fell, and Vaughn lifted Zadie down before she could get wet. Inside, the fire was warm and the smell of stew filled the room. Zeke came running from the back room with a pine cone in hand. "Mrs. Bellamy said this one's lucky," he declared, holding it out. Tallie took it, brushing a thumb over its rough scales. "Then we'll keep it on the shelf by the window." That night, after the children were asleep and the rain softened to a hush against the roof, Tallie sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair with slow strokes. Vaughn leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching her. "You ever miss the road?" she asked, not looking up. "I don't," he said. "There wasn't anything on it worth turning back for." She turned then, setting the brush aside. "I used to think I'd never stop moving. That if I did, everything would catch up to me." He crossed the room slow, settled beside her. "And now I stopped," she said, "and nothing caught up, it just settled." He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "That's what peace feels like." She leaned against him, her voice quiet. "You're the first place I ever felt safe in." "I'll keep being that," he said, "as long as I've got breath." Outside, the wind passed through the trees like a lullaby. The fire crackled down to embers. They lay side by side beneath the quilt, the silence between them soft and full. Years passed. The land behind the cabin grew thick with wheat each summer, and in the fall, Zeke helped Vaughn thresh by hand, his arms growing stronger with each season. They built the loft from the old schoolhouse boards, and Zadie filled its walls with drawings of birds and wildflowers she'd seen near the creek. Tallie planted the cottonwood near the porch. By the time it reached her height, its shade stretched long enough to cover the rocking chair Vaughn carved from ashwood one winter when the snows came early. Neighbors stopped in more often, bringing preserves or needing help with a calf. Tallie kept a ledger of what came in and what went out, but never asked for more than was offered. On summer evenings, they sat on the porch, Zadie curled at Tallie's feet, Zeke whittling with Vaughn's old knife, and the sky wide and golden above them. One night, after the children were grown and the fields had been replanted for the 20th time, Tallie stood in the doorway of the barn and watched Vaughn oil the hinges on the tack chest. His hair was grayer now, his hands slower, but his eyes still found hers the same way they always had. She walked to him across the straw-dusted floor, took the cloth from his hands and set it aside. "Come sit with me," she said. "The moon's full and the porch is waiting." He followed her without a word. They sat side by side while the cottonwood leaves whispered above them. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke, and the stars blinked low and bright across the ridge. "I never thought I'd get the kind of life that holds quiet like this," she said. "You made it," Vaughn replied. "I just helped carry it along." She leaned into him, her hand resting over his heart. "I love you," she said, not because she needed to, but because she always had. He kissed her cheek, slow and certain. "I know," he said, "and I love you right back." And that was the life they lived, weathered, rooted, full. A life they built with calloused hands and open hearts, where love didn't need proving each day, only showing. And show it they did, for all the days they were given.